Hey friends, I'm Maxwell Freud, a queer Minneapolis-based game designer and the host of Hatched This Way, a limited audio series where I chat with other queer folks in the tabletop industry to learn all about who they are and how they contribute to the hobby by being their authentic selves. And today I am chatting with Jake and Austin from Pops and Bejou. How are y'all doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So, very important question. How do you identify? What are the things that make you you?
Are we? I'll go first. So I'm Austin. I am a gay cis man. I am the Pops of Pops and Bejou games, which started about 2 years ago, kind of at like the kitchen table, because our who started this game company really wanted to create a game. And that's been on our bucket list for forever. And we decided to create our first game, Cultivate. And it kind of just went from there. We decided to make a board game company surrounding our first game, which is honestly a crazy endeavor. I know, you get it.
Yeah.
And that's been crazy. My day job is actually architecture. So I really like architecture. I really enjoy film and movies. I really enjoy traveling. And yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell right now.
I'm Jake. Pronouns he, him, his. I am a queer man. I guess I use the label bisexual. And yeah, I jumped in on this crazy adventure, and I'm the ampersand in the Pops and Bejou games. Our friend Jenna is the Bejou, and I'm the ampersand because I introduced them and gave them the nicknames, or at least kept the nicknames alive and going, which, yeah, so I don't know. I guess that's that. I'm still a student, but I also work in politics sometimes and in marketing and things like that. So
awesome. So I guess real quick, how did you two meet?
In college, actually. So he came on as the fourth roommate my junior year, his sophomore year. A mutual friend of ours, decided to fill the fourth spot in our apartment with Jake. And I was skeptical at first, but no, it turned out to be really, really great.
it was the best thing that's ever happened to you.
Honestly, it definitely livened up the apartment. It was much more fun after that.
So next question, talk to me about kind of the journey of figuring out your like queerness or that identity. Like what was that kind of like coming to terms or exploring that? Or
Well, both of us are from small towns, which obviously in a lot of cases can be difficult. I won't speak on your experience, Pops, but for myself, being from a small town in Minnesota was not something you heard a lot about, not something that was talked a lot about, and not something that when it was talked about was talked about in the best way. I didn't have that sort of rhetoric at home. Like that wasn't the type of teachings I got at home. There wasn't any sort of negative negative feelings or whatever, but it still just, never really came up. It wasn't a thing that was really talked about. But from a pretty young age, I would say like second grade, I remember just being like sitting in class being like, I think she's cute and I think he's cute. And like, what does that mean? And I guess I just kind of didn't really do much about it. I was young. I was just like, okay, whatever. And then just kind of growing up, as you get older and older and start to kind of come into yourself as a person more, your personality starts to develop more. And I think having, feminine qualities, quote unquote, and just kind of starting to get some of that sort of ridicule and comments from peers at school and things like that. I guess I kind of started to push back that side of me. I mean, bisexuality is me as a whole person, but quote unquote, that part of me. And just tried to focus on the part of me that liked girls. And I guess with bisexuality, it was this weird feeling where like I didn't feel like I was lying, because, you know, when I had girlfriends or this and that, I still liked them because I was interested in them. I didn't feel like I was lying, so I didn't feel like it was wrong. And, you know, maneuvering that journey is, you know, it's hard to be wrong because there's no guidebook on how to do it perfectly. But I guess it was really once I got to college and was in a bigger town. I mean, it was Fargo, North Dakota, so it's still like not New York or LA or even Minneapolis or anything, but there's still more people. And there's, you know, being a college town, there's people from all over the place. And so you get to hear new stories, new inputs, you have new conversations. And so I think through the help of being on my own and meeting new friends, and developing relationships with, you know, professors, or I worked at the university, so just with, you know, other faculty and staff within the university, and just having conversations and kind of just learning more about things like diversity and inclusion and all of that, I started to feel more comfortable in myself. And I think I was 21 when I finally started like telling people that, like, yeah, hey, I like everyone and that's who I am and that's what it is. And I was met with nothing but love from everyone, including people from the past, from the small town and things like that. Very, very accepting family. I have a very, for being from a bunch of small towns, like all of my family is scattered around small towns, a very progressive family that comes from grandparents on both sides, just somehow, even though they were from tiny towns, being very progressive. I very much so lucked out with having such a loving and open family with multiple queer people and queer relationships within my family. So yeah.
Sorry, it's my turn.
Yes.
I think I figured out that I was different, probably like 6th or 7th grade. My, you know, girlfriend at the time, I don't know if you really, you know, say we were actually dating, but I kind of just, you know, viewed her more as a friend. And, you know, when you're starting talking about, you know, going further in the relationship, that wasn't for me. And I, you know, I kind of went from there. I was pretty closeted in high school, just because, yeah, I'm also from a small town, 700 people. And so, like, word travels definitely very fast. And so I just didn't want that drama. My family has always been very accepting of other people and have been very open. So I was very, very lucky in that regards. Of course, I didn't come out to them until like my senior year of college, just because honestly, I hate awkward moments. If I can avoid awkward moments as much as possible, I like to. So it was literally, I think it was 2016. I told myself at the beginning of the year, I was like, I'm going to come out to my parents. Like, this is the year. And it was New Year's Eve, right before 2017, is when I finally came out to them. On my way out the door, going back to school from Christmas break, I was like, hey, by the way, you know, this is me. And it was funny because, of course, my mom was like, duh. She's like, okay, yeah, sure. Like, of course. And my dad, it was just so funny because it was just like literally all the cliches in the book. It was, you know, when did you know? Like, you know, why do you know, why are you doing, not in a bad way. He was just honestly curious. And it was funny because my brother also knew how cliche all of his questions were, and so he would just laugh and he's like, Dad, really? Like, so that, yeah, it's been really great because my family has been really great. It's been a long journey for me. I honestly just recently kind of came out to my extended family in this past year or two, and again, to avoid awkward moments, I literally just brought my boyfriend to holidays and I was like, here it is, everybody. Here we are.
I am also from a small town. in Wisconsin, though. I live in Minneapolis now. But yeah, 2,000 people. So you definitely have me beat with the 700. But
It's tiny.
still super small. Yeah, it's a whole experience. I think even for a small town, so I don't know about y'all, but like even for a town of like 2,000 people, there were still a decent number of queer people in like my class and like my immediate, give or take a few years. Like there was like a relatively decent amount of us looking back on it, and like what I know now. Like we for sure didn't know then, because I don't think anybody was really out in a small town.
No, I think there was maybe one out gay person in my small town, which, like looking back on it now, I'm like the courage that it took, and like it was really nice to see that. And I mean, he was kind of a role model for me, right? To say that, you can be this way and it's okay. Like that, your life doesn't have to end, right? When you find out that you're queer, like you can have a future, and it's pretty great.
Oh yeah, I don't think I had anyone like that. We just didn't talk about it. Like even if someone like one of my best friends was a little more, I don't flamboyant, you could say, but we just like didn't talk about it. People, I don't know what he would say his experience was growing up, but I think he kind of just like did his own thing, and no one named it or mentioned it. I think that's how most of us just got through life, is we just didn't talk about it or bring it up, and we just avoided it. And if you don't have an issue, then maybe nothing's wrong. And
Right. I think that, in my experience, it feels like such a small town because I'm like from like an hour outside of the cities. So, right on kind of right after all of the suburbs. So like my community, it's a bunch of small towns combined together. It probably, ends up being like 12,000 people or something like that. So I guess it's still kind of small, but it's not like 700 people small. But, there were a handful of out queer people, and there were queer relationships, and there were queer couples going to prom and things like that. And it really didn't cause any sort of a stir. It's just, I think it kind of, the amount of out people kind of also averaged out with the amount of outwardly bigoted people. And so they kind of just canceled each other out. And then most of the people just kind of did their own thing, didn't talk about it, didn't do anything, whatever. But I would say that those handful of people that were awful about it, unfortunately, affected me more than the handful of people who were embracing it and out and proud and all of that. And obviously that's super unfortunate that even though they were kind of, it's kind of an even on both sides, the negative still won out in my mind and in my self-confidence over the positive. But I think, we're moving in a different direction where that number of people who are outwardly supportive and positive and, living their truths or being very vocal about their support of people living their truths is starting to grow and grow and grow and outnumber those people who are negative, speak negatively of it and are outwardly bigoted. And so I think, moving in that direction is super great. And I'm happy that young queer individuals now get to have at least a safer experience in a safer space. It's obviously not perfect yet, but I think moving in the right direction.
Right. I don't know if it's the same for you too, but thinking about this, like I feel like growing up, I was always overcompensating for things. Like I would always, like I kept, I was a goody two shoes, right? I was, involved with every academic thing that you can be in. I was always, trying to get good grades, and I was trying to be this better person. And I feel like part of that is probably to, overcompensate, this identity, right? So people that, when I do come out, right, or when they do find that out, or and I'm a little more flamboyant as well, so like people probably had opinions, right, and so I would overcompensate those opinions to be like, I'm a good person, like I'm a good upstanding citizen or whatever, and so it'd be harder for them to hate me just because of who I am.
Yeah, I think that like I don't know if validation is the right word of I don't know. I feel like it's a very common experience because I also was like above a 4.0. I think I tried way harder than I needed to for especially grades. I did like I was like lead in the musical and then festival king or whatever. But yeah, I feel like that's a queer thing is like I think we're used to like going that extra mile or putting in like more effort than what is normally expected or needed. Like I feel like that's a thing. Like
No. I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, I think that's, I don't know. I feel like that's why a lot of people in our community are creative. And I mean, that's why you can make a podcast of this, because there is a lot of creative queer people, right? And maybe part
yeah.
of that is just because we're overcompensating. Or on the flip side of that, I think we are more free to be creative, because I will say so many men in my small town, like, if you're creative, like, nope, that's it, you're a pansy, you're whatever, like you can't do anything, right? So they're just like stifle their creativity, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I hate like one of my least favorite sentences is I'm not creative or like I don't do creative stuff. Like I hate it when people say that. I'm like, I don't know who hurt you. Obviously a lot of people, but
Right.
I don't think that's true of anyone. Yeah, I think for me also religion was a big thing. Like my town, you either went to the bar or went to church or both, probably. Most likely you were at like just went from like church to the bar. Or
Right.
like you left the bar and then shambled into church.
Right.
And so like religion was a big part of my life growing up. And that was also a huge thing is it was probably more pressure from church than it was people around me my age, where I don't think that people my age really like, now that I think back on it, ever like directly bullied me for like being different or gay or anything like directly. I think it was more so the adults in the town who were like in the church that I'd had someone who like vehemently thought it was a sin and unnatural and would talk about that, and it was preached, and I went to Jesus camp where they prayed the gay out of people, and like I just didn't want like there's all that pressure on me. I think that was honestly more of a reason that I was like super closeted, and I went like to a toxic level to overcompensate in terms of like I was also like anti-gay. I wasn't just like unopinionated. I was
Yeah.
horribly opinionated because I'm like, oh, I go to the church and that has to be my opinion because that's what everyone around me is saying. And so I just like went all in on it. It took me a long time to like just come to terms with it. I was still saying awful things in college as I was like going out and exploring being gay. Like I was living this like very conflicted life, and I just like thought that was fine until eventually I was like, no, I'm just not. Maybe this isn't great. So
Right.
No, I did the same thing, which is funny because like I didn't like that wasn't what I was taught. I like wasn't really taught like conservative values or anything. And I grew up Catholic. My mom worked in the church. I grew up in the church, but it wasn't, I guess I don't know what other Catholic churches are like, but the church I went to, it wasn't something that was really talked about or brought up a lot. It wasn't something my parents talked about, brought up. Nothing. I mean, I know this sounds really stereotypical, but my mom was a theater major. So that's what she got her degree in. So she was very progressive, very liberal Catholic, because that was just, I think her journey of growing up when she was younger, in theater and doing all of that. She was exposed to new people and new things. And so, yeah, I was, when I was in high school, I would have these conservative values that might parents didn't even have. And they were like, what? What are you, where are you getting this from? And it was just me echoing whatever I thought I needed to say to, try and overcompensate and hide that part of myself. It's like, yeah, I do theater, I'm in choir, but I play basketball too. So, that evens out. I'm fine. I don't know what you're talking about.
I forget that you introduced yourself as a Republican to me
I know,
in
not to get into
college.
politics, but I was just like, yeah, I was like this. I used it. I used ideology, political ideology kind of as a shield almost. And then getting into college and learning more things, I just was like, no, this is not who I am. And literally it was just like snap, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, hi, these are actually my beliefs now, everyone, just so you know. And they're like, huh, what? And of course my parents were like, yeah, like, I know you don't have hateful opinions. I know you never did have hateful opinions because you're not a hateful person. We didn't really know why you were like saying, I mean, I wasn't saying awful things, but I was like, I would say things like, oh, I'm okay with, same-sex couples, but it shouldn't be called marriage because marriage is a holy sacrament. But, if they want to be together, they can, have their civil union. That's fine. So I wasn't homophobic, but by any means, but I very much so just had those, those kind of buzzwords, those little really cliche sayings that people say when they are homophobic, but don't want to come across homophobic. And me, I was saying them because I was hiding and I was avoiding. So yeah, it was a weird journey, a long journey. I'm happy where I'm at now. that's in the past. I'm glad people have allowed me to grow and change. So
do you ever see old statuses or stuff from yourself or anything and you're like, oh god, not this?
I try not to look at Facebook anymore. So
I saw one the other day, and it was like, I had a post, and it said something along the lines of like, out for dinner, oh my gosh, this waiter we have is so gay. And my cousin commented to me like, that's a little homophobic, Jake. And I was like, no, that's not what I mean. He's just like, really a lot. And I'm like, hi, I've been this flamboyant and expressive my entire life. So he was probably no more expressive and flamboyant than I was, but I was trying to shift the attention to this mysterious waiter that nobody on my Facebook feed knows who I'm talking about at all. Yet I still felt the need to share that with the world. Granted, I got Facebook in like 7th grade. So I think the status was from like 8th grade, like too young to have Facebook. Right. But still, just it's weird looking back and seeing like the motivation in doing that did not come from hate towards him. It came from hate towards myself.
Right. And I feel that too, because in college too, I just remember there was this one point in time where we went on this study abroad trip, and the person who took us on there, I was like, oh my gosh, he's very flamboyant or whatever, to the point where I told somebody, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's gay. And that person literally looked at me and like, so like, why is that important? And I literally had the realization, I'm like, oh like I look so homophobic in this moment. And I'm like, and that was when I was trying to come out to people, and I'm like, I need something needs to change.
No, it took, I eventually like made friends who were older, and they were like very patient with me and just were themselves. And I think that was like the beginning of me like actually seeing people who are comfortable just being themselves. Is like the funniest story. I went to like First Ave 18 plus night, and these guys were there randomly, and we just like made a connection, and I'm still friends with a lot of them. And I don't know that like younger me, even if I had like, I would have to have a very specific kind of role model, I think, to have made that kind of impact on my younger self. So I hope things are changing. I think we also didn't grow up with Facebook, right? Like we didn't get Facebook till high school. I feel like I didn't. I don't know how old y'all are.
I got it in 7th grade. Yeah.
It was like middle school, high school. Yeah. Maybe like 10th grade.
I mean, we didn't have, TikTok. Vine came out later. That was like YouTube kind of started.
Mm-hmm.
in what that was like 2006. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah.
So we didn't have like a lot of the content. There was no RuPaul's Drag Race. I think there's so much more representation just available to people who, if they search, like they can find it without needing someone in their immediate circle to be a role model or just an example or of some kind. Like I remember I have two older sisters, and I watched all the movies they watched, and they love watching like French Kiss and Clueless. I watched Clueless so much, and I never connected that the Christian was gay. Like I think they say it. I don't know. Do they say gay? I think they just like talk around it, but I never saw him like actually do anything romantic with another man. So like growing up, I watched that movie so many times and I never connected that he was like, oh, he's interested in men. Never hit me because you never see him with another man.
Mm-hmm.
It was right. It was subtle. It was very, very subtle. And everything, right, growing up was subtle.
Right. Well, it was either subtle or it was overly stereotypical, which like
Right.
I also, there's kind of this weird, like, we don't want everything to be the stereotype, but I also want the stereotype to be seen as negative because some people do embody the quote unquote stereotype, and that's not wrong. They're not wrong for being the quote unquote stereotype. But there's obviously more. There's more than just that. There's more variety. There's everybody's their own person. Everybody has their own interests. And I think that as time has gone on, we saw a lot of just like token characters, a lot of queer coding in like villains and things like that. And then, that evolved into a little bit more positive representation, but, very much of the stereotype. And then it kind of evolved into less stereotypes, but then just always kind of that like dramatic sob story, the coming out story, which very important. I'm not at all diminishing that, but that is not the only thing we need to see all the time. That's not the only representation that queer people deserve. They, those stories are important and need to be told, but also just like the everyday average person who just happens to be queer, that's something that we are kind of starting to see a little bit more now, which I think is great. I think all of the stories need to be told, from the heartbreaking ones to the happy, jolly, normal's a bad word to use, but the happy, jolly, everyday stories that just are just real life.
I mean, I love that like Netflix and Hulu and whatnot has literally like a section for LGBTQ plus stories. Like that's great. Cause I remember growing up, it was nothing, maybe YouTube. I mean, I didn't really have cable TV either. And so I remember flipping through channels at a friend's house and Queer as Folk came on, which then it was down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos about Queer as Folk. And that was the gay representation that I saw in like movies or TV, which was not necessarily a bad one, not great, but not a bad one. So that was my first,
well, it's
viewing.
just not necessarily age appropriate, which like
correct.
That's,
yes.
certain content is meant for certain ages. That's just what it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, I think a lot of the early on queer representation was geared towards an older audience, and we haven't really started to see representation towards the younger audience until more recently. And then that's now why we're seeing such ridiculous outcries with different bills, and I won't dive into that, but we're seeing that now, and it's just absolutely ludicrous. Because I'm sorry, I wrote a paper on queer representation in children's like media and the evolution of it, so I'll try not to ramble too much. I'm very interested in it. But just the most minor things, like a Disney Junior show, Doc McStuffins, in an episode, they're trying to save this little boy who got lost, and he had two moms, and it was just completely normal. There was no anything. There's no questions about it at all. Like, my niece and nephews have two moms. Like, they watch it, and they're like, oh, my niece is like, oh, it's like me. It's like my mom's. Like, just that little thing. It's not inappropriate. There's nothing inappropriate about that, but it meant so much to her because it was just like her seeing what her family looks like on a show that she watches every day. And, we are starting to see that more and more. And I don't know, we need to keep moving in that direction and expand that representation to lots of different creative outlets, and music and video games and board games.
I just watched Better Nate Than Ever, which is on Disney Plus.
Mm-hmm.
It was cute. My issue with it was that like the kid, and he has a best friend, and she like confesses that she likes him more than a friend, and he says to her, "Oh, I'm not like that." And then earlier in the movie, his dad says, "Well, he's different." And no one names it. You don't see him. Like, he knows that he's not attracted to women. And there's a lady on the bus who's like, "I'll explain it to you on the way home." And I'm just like, I hated that there was no like actual queer representation in the movie.
Right.
Like, I guess, like, he says he's not into women, so I guess that's kind of queer, but he doesn't say it. I'm like, this is so close to queer baiting. Like,
yeah,
he maybe he's gay. I guess he could be ace or arrow. Like, I guess the door's open for that. Like, who was going to be offended if the kid said, I like guys, or just like,
right.
Even if we saw a queer couple, like, I didn't see any.
Yeah, it's like the getting right to that spot and then stopping, not actually addressing it. And that's unfortunately probably the majority of representation we are seeing in those types of programs right now, is kind of that, like, we're not going to quite get there, but like, if you know, I'm like, no, like, just just do it. And there are some, like, there's a Disney Channel show called Andy Mack where the character straight up said the words, "I'm gay," which is like the first time that the words have been straight out said in a children's program. And that was a really big deal. Like, it was really celebrated. But, obviously there was a backlash with it. And I think that, unfortunately, when these major corporations are getting that backlash, they start to retreat. And that's not the answer. Like, I'm sorry, if you want to talk about from a strictly business decision, if that's what your brain is doing, is thinking business, you're going to get more business if you're outwardly like, yes, from queer people and from queer supporting people, then you're going to lose from bigots, because we're a very strong community and we very much so value allyship and representation a lot more than bigots value boycotts. Like, they're all talk. They don't actually stop their children from watching Disney Channel. They don't. But like, I don't know. I just don't understand the line of thinking, because the numbers don't add up to me in my brain.
I don't get it either. And honestly, the route that Disney has taken with like their movies recently has just annoyed me. Their shows are getting better. They have a lot of more queer representation in their shows, and they will actually say it. But yeah, their movies are all just like, it's queer baiting. Like, they say, "Oh, there's going to be a gay character," but then nobody actually talks about it. Nobody says anything. It's right, like you said, you get up to that line and you don't say a word. And that's what I was just frustrating. Like, their new movie Turning Red, like one of their friends at the end, I think, I mean, I guess I don't know, right? I mean, I can't stereotype, but I think he, is in the queer spectrum, but like, it's never really said, right? It's just alluded to. And I'm like, I don't know, just like say something, just put it in there, and we can have a representation.
Well, isn't something coming up with like Lightyear? I'm like, it's coming out in June. They better have a queer character in there. And then I saw something where like they removed it and they're putting it back in or something. I don't know. I'm sure.
Right. Yeah. Sure. I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it.
I'm sure it's super clear.
The world doesn't care. Like, when you actually like at least, I guess I shouldn't say the world, but at least the United States, when you poll the citizens of the United States and you ask them their opinion on it, like, they do not care. And I just think to shy away from representing such a large population of people because of the few loud voices, it's cowardly, in my opinion, because the rest of the world doesn't care. You're just listening to those few voices, those angry voices, the loudest voices in the room, but they don't actually represent the masses. And the thing is, like, these corporations, these businesses, they know that. They know the numbers. They know how these things poll. They know where opinion lies, but they still just.
I mean, it gets into that gets into whole like internet culture just in general right now about the loudest voices. So it's rough. We're still trying to figure out the internet.
I have not gotten into that in any of these episodes yet, but it's a very large subject to tackle, I guess, in the time that I have to edit these things. So I guess let's shift to talking about board games, how we met each other. So how did y'all get sucked into this all-encompassing hobby?
Right. I guess growing up, I always loved board games. I never really got into I want to say actual board games. I know some people will get mad at me for saying, Monopoly, Scrabble, or whatever. All those are not real board games, but I'm sorry, they're the base, right? They're the base. I'm saying they're probably going to get mad, and Jake's already mad at me for saying that, but that's what I played. It was like 7 different Monopolies and like, the Clues and the Lives or whatever. And so that's what we played growing up. And then in college, we started having more and more board game nights. And that's where I got to, Catan was brought out and, Carcassonne and like all those, the newer games that have, really started this whole board game renaissance that we're living in right now. And that's how I kind of got more and more into board games. And then when I moved back to Fargo a couple of years ago, these are the people that really liked board games. And so I moved back, and Jenna was here, and then Jake moved back a little while later, and we were playing board games. And I know specifically Jenna and I had it on our bucket list to create a board game. I'm sure Jake did too. And that kind of got us into this whole world of board games. Was kind of just our love for playing them, obviously. But then also we wanted to create something. I needed a creative outlet. I wanted to create a board game, and this is how we got into it.
For me, I was definitely less into games as Pops and Bejou, Austin and Jenna were. I always liked games, but my games, like my personal collection, consisted more of Cards Against Humanity and Apples to Apples and What You Meme and all of those games. And then, in college, I played Catan for the first time, and I really enjoyed that. But didn't really venture further into other games that more that direction. I still, that was really the only one I ever played outside of the games we grew up with, like Monopoly and Sorry and Trouble and Candyland, and then those party games, the get a prompt, play a card type games, all the different versions of those. And then when I moved back and they kind of told me about this project that they were starting, I was like, that sounds different, interesting, unique, something I've never really actually thought about doing. And I always enjoyed making games, like in school, whenever we got to do a creative project, like in history class or whatever. I made board games all the time. Even in college, we got to do a creative project for this geology class I was in, and I made a geology board game. I should really see if I have any of those, break them out, see if they're worth making it into a real game. They're not, I'll tell you that. But so yeah, it was just something unique, kind of just try out. I guess honestly, I really just was kind of like, sure, I'll give it a go. It was, for me, it wasn't like, yeah, this is going to happen. But then as it was evolving and as it was going, the pieces just kind of started coming together. And then throughout that journey, the two of them started introducing me to more and more games. And so then my brain started to become filled with more board game knowledge and more love for board games. And then it just kind of grew from there. And in a year, I think my board game collection went from like 6 games to like 106 games, which really was not good on the wallet, but it was good for the soul. So I guess that's all that matters. But yeah, so I guess I'm a latecomer to the love of board games, but now I'm super into it. And I mean, it just kind of happened. It kind of evolved. The pieces fell into place. The three of us all brought different things to the table and made a really well-rounded team. And then we got our artist, who then ended up joining the team as a full-on member. So there's the 4 of us now, and we all bring our own skills to the table. And here we are now.
Y'all, when I found out there were board games on Kickstarter, it was game over for me.
Oh, seriously.
Yeah. I was like, I need to back them all right now.
Too many.
When they show up, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, another game. I forgot about you.
Yeah.
I think I still have like 5 games.
I was refreshing. Yeah. I was like, oh, who knows when they're launching? I'll never know. God, I was dumb. Do you have some favorites or ones that you like to recommend to people who are maybe getting into the hobby?
Yeah, for getting into the hobby, there are some that I recommend that I think are kind of easy to pick up on, but still kind of get you into that mindset of board games. Like, I think Azul is a pretty good one to kind of catch on to pretty easily and kind of learn, the dynamics of, pattern building, puzzler type games. So that's one that I recommend to newcomers. What about you, Pops? I've been talking a lot.
No, I really like Wingspan is one of my favorites. Camel Up is now one of my new favorites. I finally played that one. That was really fun. I like Villainous. I think I like Villainous more just for the collection aspect of it. Like, I really just want to collect them all. And then Parks is one of my absolutely favorite games. Yeah, I would recommend any of those. And I think we like to make games that are right middle of the road, like not too much strategy, but not too easy either. And I think I like playing those games too. It's games that you can actually get people to play.
Right. The games that have enough to them, where like the intense board gamers still have enough that they can do with it. They have enough strategy to work with, where their interests are still being met, their attention still being kept, but it's not too complex where non-board gamers are just like stressed out and like it's too much for them. So yeah, those middle ground games, those are what we're making, and that's what attracts me as well. As for my favorite games, it changes all the time. I don't know. Wingspan's always a favorite of mine, and I really like Expansity, and Downforce is fun. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of them. Point Salad. I really like Point Salad.
Talk to me about either your identity or what were your goals when you went into designing and developing a game for the market?
I know Jake could probably speak more on this. So we really wanted to show representation within our board game, and that's not just necessarily queer representation, but every representation when we wanted to do it. I think subconsciously we make our board games very colorful. So that's, I think, something that, adds a little flair. But yeah, we wanted to make board games with characters, and we wanted to make board games with characters that aren't just, white men and white women. So in Cultivate, we do have a trans person in there. And I know we just, went into everything about, not saying their identity. We do say they, them in it, but I suppose it's, it's not like in your face, but it is in their bio, right?
Right. Well, I think one of the things when creating the characters that I set out to do was, yeah, to be sure that obviously there's so many different backgrounds of people in the world. So you obviously in one game you can't represent every single one, but we just in our games we want people to be able to choose characters that are closer representations of themselves. And in a lot of board games I've seen, there's not a lot of representation. There are some games that do for sure. But you look at Clue, all white people, and being white ourselves, I don't have the knowledge. It's not my voice. I'm not going to pretend that I know how to properly represent people. So what I did is I worked with a few different kind of cultural experts, like people who work within diversity and equity and at culture centers and universities and things like that, to get their input and their help and their advice on creating these characters and the design of the characters and all of that, to try to make our games more inclusive and representative of the world, because there's a lot of people in the world and not everybody's the same, obviously, and they shouldn't be the same. So yeah, one of our characters is non-binary, and we use they them pronouns in the bio, and just kind of those normalizing the use of pronouns in board games is something that's, I don't know, to me it's just like obvious, like it should just be done. Like there's no reason to not. If you're going to have named characters in your games, have pronouns. Let people know the background, the story, the identity of who they're playing as, because then I don't know. I don't know how to word it. It's so weird talking about it being, like cis and white. Like I don't want to ever come across like a, with like the white savior complex or the cis savior complex or anything like that, because that's not my intention. My intention is just that, like, we're doing this thing, we're making board games. Why not do our part to help expand representation and make our games more accessible and relatable and friendly to everyone, because everyone deserves to see themselves in movies, books, games as well.
Like you said, I think we have a lot of privilege, but we are still part of a marginalized community. So I think it does give us a sense of what it feels like to be excluded. I mean, I still look for I don't know that I can really say I have a game on my shelf that I see myself in specifically. Like,
right.
I guess in some ways, but not really. Like, I don't really feel like, oh, this is the gay character that I totally identify with. I don't have that game on my shelf right now. I guess maybe I don't know. I have your game on my shelf, so too bad you don't explicitly state it.
Well, I don't know if any of our characters are gay. I don't know if we ever really decided the sexual orientations of the characters.
Well, and that's right, and that's the hard thing too. I mean, we've been talking about representation as far as like visual media, as far as film, and it's much easier to do a backstory. It's harder to do in a board game, but I don't think it shouldn't be done. I think we should be done, and this conversation has now made me realize that maybe we need to be more explicit about it.
Well, and that's the thing, is I think that we're learning and growing, and I think that for me, when thinking of new ideas, when I'm working on possible new games and things like that, I'm looking at more obvious, I guess, I don't know if that's the best word, but more outward ways to show queer representation. Like in Cultivate, your cult leaders, you're recruiting followers, you're doing your agenda, all of that. I contemplated the gay agenda at one point in time. Didn't know how that would go with a cult-themed game. Didn't want it to come across negative. So, just decided to not go that route. And we have, the backstories and pronouns, things like that. But, as I'm thinking about new games, there are games that have like romance themes or dating themes within the game. And, I've thought about, if I have a game that includes that, how am I going to maneuver that? Like, is it just going to be like everybody dates everyone? Is it going to be like, oh, this character is gay, so he is only going to date these other boy characters on these cards, and this character is a lesbian, so she's only going to date these other women, or this person's pan, this person's bi, they're going to date everyone. Just kind of figuring out how to maneuver that, how to fit it into a board game, how to best make it work with game dynamics, game mechanics, and really get that message across within a game. I think if I was writing a TV show, I could I could come up with some great storylines that are very, very obvious and get my point across, get the message across, get all of that. But in a board game, you have to figure out how to fit it into a game without it making it seem like sexuality is a game.
Yeah. So, one of it's been like a common theme that's come up as I've been talking to people. And I think the conclusion is no one wants it forced into a game. Like, I don't want a tacked on queer character. I want it where it makes sense. Like, I don't need to be explicitly represented in every game or TV show or what have you, but I want there to be an option somewhere in your catalog, I would hope, where it's like, oh, it makes sense. This is a dating game and we have relationships are a thing. So we want different types of relationships to be represented. It's not just the I talked to someone about this game already, but like the Everdell example where it's just the husband and wife in the game. And it's like, well, you couldn't think beyond that. That was it. That's the only relationship you have. Yeah, I think there's room. Like, if you're going to have that, why not make more? But yeah, it's I think it's pushing for people to design games with inclusion as like a core concept, a core engine.
Right.
Like a queer dating game. Why not?
Right. Exactly.
What are you seeing or what do you hope to see in the industry as like, not now you're in it, you're like professionals, you're doing this, not full-time, but you're doing it. What's your goal or hope going forward with games, and what do you hope to see from other people?
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to mention was my impression of the gamer community. I don't really know much of the board gamer community, but just the gamer community was like, I had heard a lot of bigoted rhetoric coming out of it, and I've heard a lot of like loving, accepting, really like progressive rhetoric coming out of it, I guess kind of depending on who your audience is, depending on what kind of games you play. And I think my experience before really getting into board games and everything, if I was in a game store, and there was, maybe some people playing like RPGs, you'd maybe hear some, not great words being thrown around, some slurs, things like that. And so it's kind of like the community, I was kind of like, I'm not quite sure what to think about it. And then getting into the board gaming community and specifically going to Gen Con and seeing so many people walking around with, their name tags, with those little banners that you can connect to your name tag, that said, they had pronouns. So, people's name tags had their pronouns on them. Or, there were ones that said ally or said gay, queer, lesbian, all of that, just kind of seeing how many people were utilizing those and how many different booths were handing those out. That definitely made me really optimistic about the board gaming community and what the direction it's going and what just type of people, I guess, are a part of it. And then I have also seen some other games on Kickstarter with people using pronouns within the game and people, not adhering to the norms of, you know, what people should look like and how people should act and all of that. And so I just hope to see that growth keep going in that direction where the board gaming community does represent everyone and is inclusive to everyone. And I would love to see the community, you know, kind of start to vocalize that more and let people know that that is what the community is, rather than people being kind of scared away, frankly, from some of the rhetoric they might hear when they're at the game store and listen to these games going on, hearing slurs being thrown around, because that doesn't represent the whole community. And I think the board gaming community is a safe space. I just don't know if people know that. So I'd love to see that message get put out there more. And then also I'd love to see, you know, a little bit more pushback against the hateful side of gaming. And I mean, I guess I don't know if it, you know, these people who I do hear speak like that come from a place of hate or just from a place of ignorance, from a complete lack of exposure, lack of knowledge, lack of whatever. But I would just love to see some increased education, some increased vocalization.
I think to Jake's point, I think personally, I think the board gaming community is maybe even a little more accepting than the overarching gaming community, just because you have to sit down with the people that you are playing with face to face, and you know you have to have a conversation in the room with them. And I think there's a large portion of the board gaming community that is queer and identifies as queer, as we saw at Gen Con, honestly. And I think, you know, just expanding that and, you know, stuff like this, like, you know, just calling out that, you know, there is this community in the gaming community, and, you know, we're all here. We're here, we're queer, we're, you know, like, this is great. And, you know, just, you know, furthering that narrative and realizing that, you know, right, board games are for everyone.
I think there needs to be even more pushback also against the moderate people who are just like, let's not talk about it.
Yeah.
It's very, you know, we're here to have a good time. Don't bring politics into it. And it's like, well, my identity is political to a lot of people. I don't have, like, marginalized people don't have the choice to not bring politics to their lives, because there are literally policies in place that make our existence political. Like, it's not an option. You can't just say, yeah, we don't talk about it. We're here to play board games. It's not about this. And if you have issues, like, don't make it a thing. And I just, you know, people need to listen. And I think even if you're not, you know, people are like, oh, I'm not homophobic, or I'm very accepting. Like, I love everyone. And it's like, yeah, but you're not doing anything to help us. You're just like saying, I'm your friend, but I don't want to, like, get into
right.
it.
It's the but, right? It's like, I'm not homophobic, but,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh God, here we go.
Well, it's the complacency. It's just, if you are just sitting by and letting these things happen, you're not, I was going to say, like, you're not like the problem, but you're a problem. You're a part of the problem. Like, yes, you're not spewing hate, but you're not stopping hate either. It's that, you know, it's the bystander thing, you know, and you see a bully bullying someone and you just watch it and it's like, yeah, you're not the bully, but you're the bystander. You're just letting it happen. And that's, you know, we need to normalize that not being okay, because if you're watching hate go down and not do anything about it, you're sending the message that you are okay with it. You're content with it. It doesn't bug you enough to speak up.
Right.
Yeah, I think people think safe space means where there is no conflict or something like that. And it's like, no, a safe space, there's always going to be some kind of conflict. It's just, that's part of being human and building relationships, even in games. Like, a good game has great conflict. Right. You need to be able, like, a safe space means I can walk in, I know if there's a conflict, I'm going to have people who are listening and supporting me. And I'm not just, like, alone trying to defend myself or make myself seen or make space or make myself feel safe. I want to know there's allies there. That's part of having a safe space is I know there's people around me who will stand with me. If you're just there and you're like, oh, I think you're great, but I don't want to get involved. That's not creating safe spaces. You're just creating a space that I can come into. That doesn't mean it's safe.
Right.
I don't know. So as a final question, if people want to learn more about your games, what you do, where do they go? What do they look for? How do they find you, connect with you, support you?
So our website is popsbejou.com. So that's POPSBEJOU.com. It's a mouthful, I know. And that's where, you'll find our store. You'll find about us. We're also on Instagram and Facebook too.
Yep. And you can find us on Instagram at just Pops Bejou Games. Oh my God. Is it just Pops Bejou or Pops Bejou Games? This is going to be edited out.
You're in charge of this.
I run the Instagram. What is it? It's games. Okay. Well, the website's just Pops Bejou, so I get confused. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Instagram. Also,
This is the whole episode.
Yep. Okay, 3, 2. Also, you can find us on Instagram at Pops Bejou Games.
Yay!
Yay! Do you have new stuff coming down that people should be on the lookout for at some point?
Yeah, so in mid-June it might be. Well, that's the other thing too. We haven't specifically had a date, but our Kickstarter is coming out soon for our second game called Channel 1, and that's WON. And that will be a semi-cooperative card game based on reporters and a news station.
And this conversation has prompted me to go check all of the content to see if
we can add something.
If we're clear enough.
You can send it to me. I'll tell you.
Perfect.
The answer is no.
No. The answer is no right now.
I would like it to be 10% more queer. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, friends, this was super fun. I'm so grateful that you responded and you're like, yes, let's do it.
Yes.
So I'm so excited to share these out and have people meet you like I just did. I think it's gonna be awesome. As a disclaimer, I just want to remind everyone that we're just a couple of queer folks. We do not speak for the entire LGBTQIA+ community, nor are we trying to. The best way to be an ally is just to keep learning, listening, and remember that we're all just trying to figure this out together. That's all I have. If you're listening, know that you're loved and perfect just the way you are. Until next time.
Awesome.
Thanks again.
Thank you.